welcome to another episode of The Full Scoop. My name is Oded Ran and I'm co-founder and CEO at Ruckit, the hosts of this show. And today we have with us Tarun Nimmagadda from Ruckit. Hey Tarun.
Hey Oded, how are you?
Yeah, really great. So Tarun, please tell us more about Ruckit and about the company, about yourself.
Yeah, so Ruckit is a construction technology business. We're focused primarily on the civil construction industry, roads, bridges, and highways. And what we do is we've created a transportation management software, which really helps manage the process of moving heavy bulk materials from the quarry or the asphalt plant to the job site, and all of the business processes that go along with that, which is, scheduling the trucks, dispatching them, keeping track of their time, paying them correctly, and then job costing and accounting. So we really connect the operations of that business. We digitize the operations of the business and then connect that into their accounting systems so that they have that full digitization from the field back into their accounting system.
That's amazing. So it sounds like the world before you invented it was fairly pen and paper and non-connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in some ways, the norm for the construction industry in moving heavy bulk materials hasn't changed in probably 50 plus years. And every time a truck driver pulls up to a plant or a quarry to pick up some material, they get issued a paper ticket. And that says, okay, you need to deliver this material to this place. And then when they deliver that material, there's multiple copies, they get signatures, they keep a copy, they give a copy, and then an invoice gets sent over with a copy of all of those tickets. And the person receiving the invoice has to match up all of the line items in the invoice with the tickets that they have receipts for. And it's always been a very manual process. And then in terms of coordinating the trucks, it's been a very manual process. It's a phone call or an SMS. And it works okay, but what we end up missing is the ability to use the power of technology to really optimize these business processes if they're not digital to begin with. So when we entered the construction industry, we saw that this was going to be a decades-long journey for us in terms of first step is really digitizing those business processes so that we can bring in that next level of technology and the advancements around artificial intelligence to optimize these trucks and digitize the paper and everything that we know that other industries have gone through this transformation. But in order for the construction industry to go through it, we have to digitize it. So we're sort of in phase, we're just kind of completing the first phase, which is to digitize the workflows. And now we're starting to get into the second phase, which is really optimizing.
Wow. And so how many years ago did you start the company? When was it started?
It's about 4 years ago now. Yep.
Wow. So tell me about the first few days. Were you working in a garage building the company? Tell us a bit more about the first few days, first few years, I should say, right? Building.
Yeah.
Ruckit.
So my co-founders in the business, Kyle and Allison, and I, when we very first started, it was probably in our apartments, which we were living at the same place at the time. All three of us were just like, 28th floor, 19th floor, 16th floor, and so it was pretty easy for us to just meet up and talk about the business. And then our first office was on the east side of Austin, which is, nobody was there back then. And now it's like become a cool gentrified spot now. We took what used to be a old lock and key type of place, I think it's called Cochran's Lock and Key store. And it was abandoned, and we remodeled the top half of the space, and that was our first office. It was pretty cool, actually. We got the original team together, Diego for product management, and we built out the very first version of the product, and probably within about 6 to 8 weeks, we had an app on a driver's phone and starting to track the loads and the trucks and getting feedback as to what the business process was.
And how did you then develop the product to know that the customers you're targeting really want it? Tell us a bit more about that process. How did you find even the first truck driver to tell you, I'm willing for you to join me and help me improve something that for 50 years I've not changed at all?
The initial customers, I really have to give them a ton of credit because they really did take a chance on us. They saw something, and one of our first customers was a company called Oldcastle. And they're actually the biggest construction company in the country. And they were one of the only companies that had a division called performance management, which was really about how do you optimize the trucks. And the leader of that group, really took a chance on us at a time when we were, still really early in the process. And so we signed a contract with them and we started working with just one of their companies here in Texas. They're called Texas Materials, one of the largest material suppliers in Texas. And they helped us work through all of these rough edges of the product that just didn't make sense. We took a guess and it was, some things were right, but it was not all the way right.
Right.
And so honestly, it's the customers that help us build the product, right?
Sure.
I mean, we're building it for them. And
How did you get to that first customer? How did you even start the conversation, telling them three young guys building a piece of software for something you've never optimized before?
I think at the end of the day, there's like an element where we think, the product was great or whatever, but in reality, people buy from people. So my co-founders did an amazing job of like building a personal relationship with created a lot of trust that actually what they were buying was not the product, but they were buying is a team that was going to do what they said they were going to do and to make, the changes that needed to be made. And that's really been, that we just continue to build on that, like the problems that we used to solve for them in the beginning versus the problems that we solve for them now are much broader.
Right.
And it's because there's a trust there. So when our customer has a problem, they think to call us and say, hey, how can I solve this problem? And it's an honor. And I think it's a credit to the fact that we built a great team and some great technology that we can say, oh yeah, that's not a problem we've solved before, but you know what? We have the right mindset and the capabilities to go solve that problem for you.
So when you go out today to speak with customers, many people would say construction industry is very slow to implement new technologies. And like you said, things are staying the way they are for many, many years. What is the secret sauce that you think works for you in terms of making it happen, changing the way people have worked before?
Well, I think first, there's probably a couple of things that come to mind. One is that, as a business, we need to be really aligned with our customer and what matters to them. And obviously this is a low margin industry, construction. It's not like the finance industry or the tech industry in terms of these super high margins. So I don't think you have a business really unless you're helping improve margins for your customers. So that's something that we think a lot about, is how do you improve margins, for your customers? And we're proud to say that most of our customers now, we're saving them, $30,000 to $50,000 a month in cost savings. And that creates some urgency because if they don't roll out Ruckit today,
right,
then they just wasted, $30,000 to $50,000. And then the next month after that, they wasted $30,000 to $50,000. So, you're definitely better off rolling out our technology today rather than tomorrow because you're leaving so much money on the table. The second thing is really, there are things that people don't like to do that they have to do. I think, human beings typing the information on a document into a computer is probably not a job that anyone really loves doing. And if you free them up from having to do some job like that, then they can use that time and their intelligence to really solve for really important problems and move that company forward in meaningful ways rather than just doing this mundane iterative task that we're basically at a point with technology that you can automate. So even though we've automated these processes, what we find is that the companies it's not like they have to fire anybody. They end up saying, you know what, now I can use my brain to figure out how to grow my business and how to make my company more profitable. And so that's really our tactic is, number one, just make sure that we're always aligned with our customer in terms of optimizing their margins. And then second is take the work off of their plate that's just monotonic and not accretive to creating enterprise value.
So can you share with us one of the success stories or case studies you've done about a company? How did they get to save money and get there?
Yeah, so one of our customers is a company called PJ Keating. They're one of the largest materials producers up in the Northeast, in the Boston area. And they really surprised us, honestly, and initially in terms of the way that they were using our system, because they had so many trucks that were running on our system that they had to coordinate every single day. And what we found is that they were doing a couple of things that were really interesting that we didn't really know about until they started using our system in this way. The first thing was that they were scheduling these trucks in a staggered manner. So rather than all the trucks showing up to the plant at 9 a.m. or 6 a.m. in the morning, they would get truck number 1 to show up at 6 a.m., truck number 2 to show up at 6:05, truck number 3 to show up at 6:10, and so on. Now, if you didn't do that, what was happening, and it happens every day, if you go look at a plant or a quarry or a dirt pit, is 10 trucks show up and the 10th truck is waiting for an hour to get loaded because the trucks are taking time. Now, these trucks are being paid, $100 an hour. So you just wasted $100 on that truck, $90 on the next truck, $80 on the next truck, and you wasted all that money before the day even got started, right? So that's thousands of dollars a day that company was wasting. So now PJ Keating kind of showed us that if you were actually able to schedule those trucks more precisely, then it could make a big effect. But that's not enough, because you need to pair all of that with a timesheet, which is to figure out, when did that truck actually, maybe I told that truck to show up at 9:10. When did he actually show up? And I want to pay him based on when he actually showed up.
Mm-hmm.
So then we had to combine this with a time tracking system where you can actually now use the GPS information, the information about when the truck got loaded, and create a time tracking system that works for these construction trucks so that we can schedule them and pay them precisely to the minute. The effect of those two changes was so tremendous. I mean, we were saving this company 50 grand a month. And over time, we've now built on that success, and we found all these other optimizations that we could do. And we're really honestly just scratching the surface, because whether it's for this company or any other company, if you just zoom out and look at the construction industry as a whole, mm-hmm. like if you looked at it from a satellite or a plane, right? You got these trucks that are just moving back and forth. Most of the trucks are just moving back and forth, and they're loaded, empty, loaded, empty, which means that more than 50% of the time, if you factor in the waiting,
right,
they're not actually productive. So there is a massive opportunity in my mind as a computer scientist, and with a computer science and a mathematics background. I look at that and I say, well, if we solve this problem, you could then decrease the cost of trucking by 20-30% by solving this problem. And there's micro optimizations that you can do within a single company, or you can do it across multiple companies. And the opportunity is just absolutely tremendous. And that gets me excited, because I think there's rare opportunities in business where there's a true win-win for everybody, where the truck driver, in order for the company, usually people think, in order for me to make my trucking cost cheaper, I need to pay my truck driver less money. Well, that's not true. If you actually made it more efficient, you can pay the truck driver more money and still have a much lower trucking cost. So everybody wins. Your customer is able to buy material for cheaper. You're able to sell material for cheaper. You get more customers, and your truck driver is making more money. So everyone wants to work for you now. And so that's really, I think, it's a beautiful thing when you create this kind of value alignment across that value chain, that all the players that are participating end up doing better because you've eliminated, waste. And at the end of the day, I mean, who's paying for these roads, bridges, and highways? It's you and I as taxpayers.
Right. Yeah.
And American infrastructure is rated C- and a D. We built all our roads and bridges and highways in this country. We built them after World War II. So it's been over 100 years, almost 100 years since we built these things, and we have to rebuild them. And we're talking about trillions of dollars of infrastructure spending that has to happen in this country over the course of the next few years. And if with COVID, some of those investments are going to be accelerated. So I think we're about to enter a 1 in 100 year cycle with regards to infrastructure investment in the United States. And I think we're, as Ruckit, we have an obligation to figure out how to make all of that infrastructure spending more efficient, so we can build 15 bridges instead of 10 bridges, right? And more roads, and pave more surfaces, so that the infrastructure for this country, and everybody talks about digital infrastructure all the time, but we'll still live in a physical world. And China and other countries are moving farther ahead, in terms of the physical infrastructure. And it's time for America to really catch back up and surpass them. And I think now is the time to do that. And I feel pretty proud that we're building a company to help move the country forward.
That's awesome. And one of the things you touched upon in terms of efficiencies is how you get these efficiencies between multiple companies. And it sounded to me a bit like some sort of an on-demand Uberized model of trucking. Is that where you think potentially the market could go in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, eventually, I think, I don't like to use the word Uberized or Uber for trucking, because actually that's, I think that really makes sense in a consumer context. In a business context, I think it would work slightly differently, but in effect, it would have the same type of effect, right? Which is what's really interesting about Uber is not just the on-demand component, right? That's one of the interesting things. The other interesting thing is that they have this liquidity and the supply-demand optimization,
right?
Which just happens organically in a business like Uber. It's much harder to do in construction, but the end result of what Uber has achieved is that because a driver in a car is able to drop somebody off, and then instead of driving empty for 30, 40 minutes, he's able to pick somebody else up, a few minutes later. And that means that that car driver on Uber is able to be busy for longer than the average taxi cab. And that's what allows the cost of an Uber to decrease over time. And if the cost of an Uber decreases enough, more people want to take an Uber. And then that creates this loop, right?
Right. Now,
I think in the construction industry, I don't think just because you make trucking cheaper, they're suddenly going to have more demand for it. I don't think it's works quite that way, but it's or more supply for it, even, because people have to go and buy a truck, whereas in an Uber you can just use any car as an Uber car, right? So the Uber analogy, it works in some ways, and it really doesn't work in other ways. But I think the end result is the same, which is that Uber made transportation more efficient. And in the same way, Ruckit is making the construction transportation for bulk materials much more efficient. So ultimately, I think that's the kind of end state, or the vision, is that a truck driver is really not driving empty 50% of the time, because there's better ways for the industry to operate.
Great. Let's switch to talk a bit about regulation. E-ticketing is still being discussed. It may happen. I'm guessing it will have a massive impact on Racket. And I'm intrigued. When you started the company, did you think regulation will be one of these things that helps you achieve your goals as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, there have been many companies now, even in the trucking industry at large, that have overnight built really big companies because they've had a regulatory wave. Like in our industry, I think it's the ELD, mandate that drove a lot of adoption of technology, and several large companies were built helping these companies navigate this regulatory wave. What ended up happening is with that regulation is that people found that once you have this kind of technology, you can use it for more than just regulation. You can use it to really do maintenance for the truck and decrease downtime, and then the use cases just started to grow. So a lot of people think regulation is just bad, and as a fairly, let's call it, a libertarian leaning person myself, I'm sort of naturally suspicious of some of these regulations. But sometimes I think it's proven that regulation can be really good for business. And the ELD mandate, I think, is a good example of that. So e-ticketing is the new potential regulation that's coming. One of the ways that it's happening is that it's happening at a local level, at a state level with the DOTs, not at the federal level just yet. So that means there's a patchwork of regulation versus ELD, which is a national regulation. And e-ticketing has been thought about for the last 10 years. Different DOTs have operated with different speeds. And then what's happening recently is that COVID-19 has accelerated a lot of these e-ticketing plans that these DOTs have already had. But now they want to get it done in by next year instead of waiting 3, 4, 5 years. So that's a really exciting thing, because we built our business to totally enable the e-ticketing use case. I mean, that's just like 5 to 10% of what we do, but it helps because we now offer our customers a very cheap entry level configuration of the Ruckit experience that just solves for e-ticketing. But then they realize, okay, now that we've digitized these workflows, it's like, okay, look what else we can do with this kind of technology. So it's a great way for people to get introduced to Ruckit, is to solve a problem that they have in complying with the changing regulations.
Right. So, and you mentioned COVID-19. How did that impact the business?
Well, in a lot of different ways. I mean, obviously, we started working from home. Everybody was a little bit worried for a while, but it turns out COVID-19 ended up being really, really of a positive thing for Ruckit as a business. Number one, none of our customers canceled any contracts with us. Many of our existing customers grew their business with us, and we started signing up new customers at a very rapid rate. So we've nearly tripled the size of the company since the beginning of the year through COVID-19. And I think it sort of validates that when you are focused on margins and like doing the right things, that this is not like a gimmick. It's not like some shiny object that we're trying to sell here, that we were actually creating enough value that companies, when they kind of got down to basics and said, who's helping us make the business more profitable? Like Ruckit is definitely one of those companies. And on top of that, I think there's more and more concern around handing off these pieces of paper and the risk of infection and that's kind of created also a level of interest in digitizing these workflows that hadn't been changed. So we feel really grateful for how we were. I don't want to say it was anybody being smart, right? Because nobody knew that COVID-19 was going to come. So we just feel like it was grace that made it happen. And we've also spent a lot of time thinking through, well, how do we give back? Because we're in a position, unlike many other companies, that were in a much tougher situation. So how do we take the fact that we've been treated better by just luck and use that good fortune to help others? So many of us have spent countless numbers of hours like volunteering, donating technology, doing what we can to help with the crisis, not sort of patting ourselves on the back and saying, look how smart we are.
That's amazing and really, really inspiring. And it's interesting because quite a lot of the similarities between what Ruckit is basically doing in that industry and trying to optimize and streamline things that were not streamlined before. We're seeing it from our end at Clue when we try to help companies track their employees and assets wherever they are. Have you seen much commingling and work together with telematics related companies or companies that help their operations be streamlined by tracking where everything is, including inspection, maintenance, and so on?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a little bit more of that because Ruckit was primarily used to manage third-party trucks that you don't own. And it doesn't make sense to have telematics, hardware-based telematics on a truck that you don't own, obviously, because you don't own it. But increasingly, companies are using Ruckit on the trucks that they own as well, because we can optimize those trucks just as well as those third-party trucks. And in those trucks that the companies own, it certainly makes sense for them to have a hardware-based telematics solution. And there's great ROI against that, just on the maintenance side and downtime, uptime, all that stuff. And so we're being asked more and more, how does Ruckit integrate with the telematics solution so that rather than the driver opening an app, the Ruckit app, we can get the GPS of the truck right from the telematics system. So we've been integrating with telematics vendors based on the customer's requests. So they say, hey, we've got hundreds of trucks running on this telematics systems. Can you integrate? We built an API that can allow us to push and pull that data through to telematics. And I think that's been going well.
That's fantastic. Great. So we'll finish with a couple of questions. So first, if you could now have a fun day operating any type of construction equipment that your customers or anyone else have, what would be the fun day? Which equipment would you choose to play with and operate?
I mean, I think I would definitely want to demolish something. So I would want like maybe one of those like excavator type excavators that have like a big crane and like smash that into like a brick wall or maybe like smash like an old car with it. And I feel like that's like having a superpower, like I would feel like Hulk or something.
Good. So anyone listening and wonder what to get you for your birthday, that's a good birthday surprise gift. And any of our listeners, people watching, want to learn more about Ruckit or connect with you personally, what's the best way to do so online?
Our website is goruckit.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or wherever.
Fantastic. So Tarun, it was such a pleasure having you on the show. As always, anyone watching and listening, you can find in the resources section all the links and information about Ruckit and about Tarun specifically. Thanks so much for being with us, and I look forward to catching up to see how Ruckit continues to grow from one fortune to another. Thank you so much for joining us, Tarun.
Thanks, Oded.